Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online. Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good morning, everyone in the Western Hemisphere, and good afternoon and good evening to the rest of you. Welcome to this CSIS event on government accountability in the age of COVID. We're going to be hearing perspectives from developing countries focused on South Africa, Mali, and Nepal. My name is Romina Bandura. I'm a senior fellow at the Project on Prosperity and Development here at CSIS in Washington. I welcome all of you, and it's really an honor to be moderating this very, timely and interesting topic on government accountability. We have three distinguished panelists with years of expertise on this difficult and important topic. We have Sherry Lee Erasmus. She serves as the Global Director of Learning at the Accountability Lab. She has spent more than a decade in the international higher education and development arenas. Sherry oversees the Learning and Impact Group and works with young leaders who are finding innovative ways to hold governments accountable in Nepal, Pakistan, Liberia, Nigeria, Mali, Niger, Mexico, and South Africa. You've got a very easy job, Sherry. So welcome to the panel. Next, we have also Dusuba Konate. She's the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning Officer at Accountability Lab in Mali. She is countering misinformation related to coronavirus with weekly bulletins through the CivAx campaign. You're going to be talking about this in a little bit. And as well, she supports young civil society leaders to build effective tools for accountability and transparency as part of the Accountability Incubator. We want to hear about that as well. And lastly, Narayan Adhikari. He's the country director of Accountability Lab in Nepal, and he runs the Accountability Lab and the CivAx campaign, which debunks damaging rumors about the pandemic. And you also have been instrumental in developing innovative tools for accountability and open government. So you all, the three of you, have very easy jobs. I really welcome you today and would like to hear more about what you're doing. Just so the audience know, we're all experiencing, of course, this terrible pandemic, and this has led to many challenges, but not only health and economic challenges, but we have challenges related to governance, transparency, misinformation, and in the absence of effective responses from government, citizens, civil society, and public sector innovators and reformers like you are finding creative ways to rebuild the social contract between citizens and the state. And we'll be hearing stories from your countries on how you're tackling government accountability, what collective efforts are being made to debunk rumors and fight fake news around the pandemic. And also, very importantly, the pandemic is linked to massive amounts of resources that are being deployed and what is being done to tackle the money and, of course, corruption. And so welcome again, Sherry, Dusuba, and Narayan. And just to some housekeeping rules, You will each have about 3 to 5 minutes to offer some introductory remarks on what you guys are working on in your countries. And then we'll have about 30 minutes for a discussion. And hopefully we have some time for Q&A from the viewers that are watching, attentively this discussion. So let me start off with the ladies. Sherry, please, the floor is yours. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Thank you so much, Romina, and thank you to the CSIS team for having us this morning. I thought I'd start off with a little bit of a quick overview on the Accountability Lab. So
Yes.
we are an 8-year-old organization currently working in 9 countries. We just very recently added to that list Romina mentioned earlier, a country team in Zimbabwe. So we're very excited to be expanding to a new geography. Essentially, the Accountability Lab does 3 things. Firstly, we build positive movements around accountability, and we do that through drawing in diverse and unlikely networks of people who aren't usually part of the integrity and accountability conversation. And that means that we engage young people, we engage artists and musicians, and people who often have the platform and the reach to generate excitement around civic engagement and around issues of corruption, but who generally aren't pulled into this conversation. Secondly, we support reformers and leaders, especially in the civil service, to ultimately go forth and advocate for changes on a systemic level that will strengthen institutions and make room for more accountability. And thirdly, we collaborate broadly with different actors and CSOs around accountability and open governance. So in a number of countries, the Accountability Lab convenes CSOs that ultimately give input into national action plans and other mechanisms attached to open government agendas. And all of our work is based on positive deviance. So ultimately, instead of a naming and shaming approach and pointing out what isn't working, we seek to convene people and build networks around what is working. That also attaches quite specifically to our work with reformers. So identifying people who are pushing for change and equipping them with skills and knowledge and networks to do better at that. That's how we envision systematic change at the Accountability Lab. Now, of course, when the COVID pandemic hit us about 3 months ago, this created a whole new series of government challenges, especially in the countries where we work with communities who are especially marginalized, who are often not able to access services that are key in terms of keeping your family safe and your community safe during this pandemic, and also in spaces where the digital divide is quite prominent. So we had done over a number of years already, since 2015, when there was a very large earthquake in Nepal, we had created a model of activating local volunteers who have been trained by us to gather information from the bottom up, so grassroots information, feed it to us in a way that we can then validate it and get accurate information back to people. This also helps us really across the geographies where we work take the temperature effectively. We are all living through an infodemic where there's so much information out there, and more often than not, it's simply just not true. More often than not, in spaces that have deep-rooted corruption, we also have challenges with trust. So community members, even if they do have access to information, struggle to discern who to trust and who to listen to. And so my colleagues Susuba and Narayan are really well placed to tell us a little bit more about what they are doing on the ground specifically. But our main objective at the Accountability Lab at the moment with regards to our COVID actions is to get accurate and validated information out there, to connect people to services that they need during this time, to raise awareness around the things that matter. And in some of our other countries, we do this very creatively. In Liberia, for example, we've created rap songs because that gets out the young people, using local radio.
Yeah.
And so just using different methods of strengthening communities' ability to keep themselves safe during this time. And Narayan can also touch a bit on our Follow the Money campaigns, because currently there's a lot more development money out there for COVID mitigation strategies. And those things come with very real corruption challenges. So our teams are also working on that to ensure that money gets spent where it needs to be and in the interest of citizens. Thanks.
Sherry, I just had a follow-up comment. You touched upon information, and a lot of these countries also have, data gaps, and and even statistics are very hard to come by. So I wanted to make that comment. And going back to your work, do you at Accountability Lab have a typical definition of what do you define, what do you consider, what's accountability for you? Do you have a set, different organizations have different definitions, but what do you look at when you like what is a synonym for our viewers of accountability, because it can mean a lot of different things.
So I'm going to frame it within the context of our work. We see accountability as an underlying value of our work. And so in essence, in the countries and in the communities where we work, all of our work is aimed at strengthening the relationship, right, between ordinary citizens or community members and their government, and essentially putting people in a better place to hold institutions and leaders to account. So that's the space within which we work. And when we talk about accountability at the Accountability Lab, more often than not, we're speaking specifically around holding governments to account.
Yes.
We don't do that much work in the private sector per se. And so when my colleagues and I talk about accountability, that's really the realm within which we talk.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Following with the ladies, I am going to ask Dasuba to give her opening remarks. Thank you, Sherry, and Dasuba, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. So on my side, I'm just going to give you a little bit of context of the situation here in Mali, because I think it's really important. So first of all, in the context of COVID-19, right now we are close to a little bit more than 2,100 confirmed cases, from which we have 1,400 recoveries and 116 deaths. So the epicenter of the disease is really here in Bamako, with 88% of the cases. And the age group that is the most affected is the group 35 to 55 years old. There's a few measures that have been put in place by the government, such as a curfew from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And this started on March 25th, and it ended on May the 8th. And there's also some socioeconomic measure that has been put in place to, for example, to reduce some electricity or water bills for specific group. So as you may know, Mali has been going through a multidimensional crisis, both socio-political, territorial, and security as well, since the 2012 coup d'etat. And we are not also escaping to the new terrorist dynamic that are sweeping the world, making the north of the country really fragile and insecure. And now it's coming to the center of the country. So the weakness of the government has really been pointed out several times. And even last month, we saw the creation of a movement called the June 5 movement, M5, which bring up several actors, including Imam Diko, who is calling for the resignation of the president of the republic, whom they consider unfit to lead the country. And this resulted in really large demonstration in the city of Bamako, gathering thousands and thousands of people. So we have to understand that right now, the Malian population is really under pressure. Not only we have that crisis since 2012, but on top of that, now we have a health crisis that led to an economical crisis and now a political crisis. So there is a large majority of Malians that are working in the informal sector. What does it mean is that really the money that you are making today will help you to feed your family and yourself tomorrow. So when the curfew happened, that means that there's a lot of people that couldn't work, and there's a lot of people that were working in the evening, such as the restaurant and things like that. So that means that they couldn't work, and we have to understand also that the system here has no social protection, such as the unemployment insurance. So the curfew has really put an end to many income generating activities without any measure to compensate. So there's a citation that I think that is really interesting that comes from a researcher from Côte d'Ivoire. His name is Frank Herman Ektra. He said that Africans themselves are confronted with a temporal paradox because they are bearing the full brunt of the economic consequences of the crisis before the health crisis, basically. So the economical crisis is really here. And when we look at the number just generally in Africa, the African continent is the least affected by the COVID-19 with a little bit more than 400 positive cases, 400,000, positive cases, and a little bit more than 10,000 deaths. And some people might say, well, this is a good thing because that means that the measure that had been put in place by the government did work. But when we go on the ground and to measure the perception of the population, we can see that there's a lot of people that do not even believe or they have doubt on the existence of the COVID-19. So that's really an issue.
So they don't believe in the statistics, or they don't believe in the pandemic itself?
Both.
So because of this distrust, of this general distrust that you have from years, this
exactly.
Social, okay.
There is a lack of trust to the government from the population. And just for like a personal experience, I've been walking in the street wearing a mask, and a lot of people were asking me, well, why are you wearing a mask? And I was like, yeah, COVID-19. But a lot of people do not believe that, probably because the information is coming from the government, and they need to have, the government definitely need to work on that trust relation.
So how do you counter that? How do you inform better the population? What do you do to build that bridge?
To build that bridge, as a civil society organization, our role is really to be that bridge between the government and the population. So our goal is really to take the information that the government is giving us. There's something that has been really great is that every single day since the pandemic started, the government has been giving some information about the number of tests that have been made in Mali, the number of positive cases, and the number of deaths. So our goal is really to disseminate that information to the local population through different platforms.
Okay, thank you, Dsuba. I'd like to also hear from Narayan. How are these perspectives in Nepal different or similar? How's your work there as opposed to in Africa? So the floor is yours. Welcome, Narayan.
Thank you, Yenin and the CSIS. This is great. I think the situation is similar. The work is similar. A little bit of different is context. So I think, like my colleagues just explain about how are things in Mali, particularly in a different context, and Sherry gave a broad overview of how the accountability lab is really working on a space, making sure that we ensure accountability during crisis with the information that people need to build their power, so that the communities, particularly young generations or whoever generation, have the information they needed and have the tool to really raise question, participate in the ongoing discourse, to ensure that the government response on the COVID is better. So let me begin to say that, of course, the COVID have pushed us in many ways back, but I see a lot of green lights and opportunities ahead. So for many, the COVID is a disease, but for me, it's a collective vision for international development. So you can see this, right? Uh, you know, and this is really at the time because we all were the part of the problem. So I think one way or other, so each one of us is responsible towards this crisis. So this is a time to really rethink and realize that how we as an individual can contribute and make sure that we are part of the larger communities to push for change and accountability. So we are all gone through this health crisis, the human and social crisis, and the economic crisis. At this point, what we needed is that we need a very careful action, collective efforts, and behaving with integrity. Like Sherry mentioned, in how important it is to have that the consensus of accountability within yourself and be a role model rather than just keep finger pointing. And I think it will lead nowhere. So of course the government in any part of the world, including my government in Nepal, is obviously not doing as expected, but the solution is not really going really going after and keep bargaining on the negative things. Is really about trying to find what is working, what's going well, and how to promote that as a values, as a good examples, and create a larger communities. So just to give you a quick context of where I'm from and how is the situation in Nepal, as you all know, so Nepal is always been a beautiful and nice and peaceful countries, lots of mountains. So we never had such issues, except few political up and downs, which I think is okay. And at the last earthquake, even though we were always below on a certain standards like Human Development Index and social and economic index, but we were always a nice country. I think we should not forget about when you think forward of how we move ahead of our history, our culture. So since the COVID pandemic hit, so we have been going through a sort of countrywide lockdown for almost 3 months. People are in harm. Last week, I had my first cappuccino after 3 months, and it was fantastic. And we all love to have come back to a normal life, and then build a space for a collective casual conversation. So far, we reached almost 14,000 cases with 500 recovered, which is great. 30 deaths. Still, the death rate is very low. Of almost 500,000 people in quarantine. And the more than like 1 million people who are stranded in Gulf and Malaysian countries as migrant laborers, with no jobs and uncertain hope to return Nepal. So as you know that when there is a difficult situation like pandemic, crisis, earthquake, tornado, for government, this is a golden opportunities. For them, sustaining their power is more important than anything else. But for us, holding them accountable is our duty. So we already had the symptoms of corruption, in terms of the government not being transparent in purchasing equipment for China, and even if they purchased stuff from China, were not good quality, all the counterfeit products. And who cares about COVID if you are dealing with other issues like India, China, border issues, conflict within your ruling parties, and the prime ministers getting high pressure on resigning, and we have a new locust, which is it's like grasshoppers, the disease invasion, and it's been 3 days. They almost destroy our crops in the Tarai, and which I see there's it'll going to lead a sort of a food crisis. And there is a big debate on Millennium Challenge cooperations. So, but everything is not, every other issue is now really, shadowing the COVID. But at Accountability Lab, what we are doing is to ensure that, we're trying to change the notions or narratives that sort of like from, moving like from crisis of accountability to the accountability in the crisis. Of course, we've been going through various crises of lack of accountability, corruption, and all these kind of things. But we cannot get excuse of, okay, we're a poor country, the corruption is always there, it's part of the corruption, let it be happen. And we cannot get that excuse. So our duty is to make sure that we raise our community, build network, share validated information, and really build the network of young people, musicians, and artists, and provide the information that is needed for the community, including financial transparency and so forth.
And also this, view that it's a cultural issue, right? Like accountability, it's cultural, and lower income countries, it's corruption is ingrained. So we need to also fight that misconception. I wanted to go back to what you all said about engaging youth, and each of you mentioned also different tools. Can you explain a little bit what kind of tools? Sherry said there's a big, of course, there's a big digital divide in South Africa and in other countries. So when we think about accountability and some of these tools, we always tend to think about internet connection and digital. But what other non-traditional, maybe non-technological tools are you using to reach these harder to reach, sorry for the word, but places and communities? And I was very curious to hear a little bit more about how you're engaging also youth with culture and with the arts. You provided several examples. So if any of you can address that in each of your countries, that would be really interesting to hear.
Sure. If I may, I think one of the tools we use here at the moment is Sherry and Dishuba rightly mentioned that we have something called civic action teams, which is a combination of traditional and the modern tools and technology and the communication medium. We know that this online is not enough, and just offline is not enough. So we have to make a fine balance. We should not just completely go away from the traditional communication culture, like radios and the telephone, and the meeting at the tea shops, chit chat, and people gathering on cooperatives and shops. But we also have to harness the new technology, social medias. Why? Because the current generation, particularly young people, who are mostly on social medias these days. So on the civic acts, how on your question, like how do we reach people who are beyond internet access or a little bit of connections or a little bit of phone, is because we have something called Community Frontliners Network. It is a network of young people from communities who have access to internet and online communities, but at the same time access to the offline communities. So they are representing their own communities where they are from, and they are bridging a pool. So they are outsourcing information from the online communities, communicating back to their own communities, and also getting the feedback from the communities, and mobilizing their local networks. The youth networks, youth clubs, the local theater groups, the artist groups, local NGOs, all sort. So this is really the combination of the offline and online, the modern and the traditional tools.
And if I may add on that point, thank you, Narayan, for bringing the CFAs, the Community Frontline Associate. In Mali, we can, they are really indispensable. I mean, it's really important to have them on the ground, simply because when I was talking about the context, there is a lot of insecurity. So meaning that even ourselves, if you want to go on the ground, we cannot go absolutely everywhere. And that's where we are working with those CFAs, because they are in all the region in Mali. And those are people who already know the community. They know what they can do, what they cannot do, not to put their life in danger as well, because this is something that is really important. But the CFAs are really, we are using them to really to measure the perception of the population. And we're using different tools. It could be Kobo Collect, that you can use even without internet. Nowadays, I have to admit, there's a lot of WhatsApp is everywhere. Like many of you, maybe like we are on so many different WhatsApp group where there's so many different type of information that are being shared. And honestly, on WhatsApp, it used to be like a messaging system. Now it's becoming like a communication platform where you can find anything and everything. And that's where we are going. In Mali, we are gathering a lot of information on those platforms with the CFAs as well. But on those platforms, we are gathering a lot of information. And that's where we can see that there is a lot of misinformation. There is a lot of fake news that is being transferred to so many people. And this is definitely an issue. And that's where the bulletins, the coronavirus Act bulletins comes from. It's really, we noticed that there were so many misinformation that were being shared in our communities, and those misinformation are really harmful. So the question is now, what can we do to actually fight those misinformation and even fight that virus? In Mali, for example, I heard so many things that Black people cannot get COVID-19. So it's important to actually say, bring some statistic and be like, hey, no, Black people are getting COVID-19, and there are some people here in our country that are actually that are sick, that just get that disease, and there are some people that are dying from it as well. So for us, it's really it's those platforms and those tools are really important. And if I may add also, not only we are gathering information, but I'm not a health expert, and my colleague either are not. So there is the process of verifying the information is key in that activity, in the sense that we are gathering the fake news and we are making the research. We are contacting the right authorities or the right entities to make sure that, well, to find the right information, and then we are using again those same platforms to disseminate the right information. So this is something that is really important. That is part of our mission.
Yeah, just to add on that, the one of the tool that we're using here is a hotline. It's kind of an idea where we are putting all our facts and rumors, so people just call in and get the information they need.
Romina,
yes,
if I can just add that we can't, when we talk about putting citizens and communities in a better place in terms of information and in terms of advocating for themselves, I think we can't take digital literacy for granted, or any sort of literacy really. Yeah. And so what's key to the information beyond the tools that we use is really how we're packaging it. So when we talk about putting out accurate information and giving people statistics that are verified and access to services, we do it in a way that is accessible through infographics that are really easy to read, icons and stats, and things that look visually appealing. Right. And that's a key component to reaching the youth. So no one needs another 2-page report, but everyone gets excited about something that's visually appealing.
And as you mentioned, things like music and probably radio channels, right? A lot of verbal communication, because I assume a lot of these people are not only digitally illiterate, but there's a lot of illiteracy, just in general, right? They can't read, right? And so I assume that the oral verbal communication is key for you.
Yes, absolutely. And oral and verbal communication at the community level.
Yeah.
And so in a number of the countries, we have partnered with community radio stations who then also receive our bulletins and are able to use that information and read it out online on the air, and people can dial in, and that stimulates conversation as well. Additionally, it's really important for us to use the networks that we have, because there is this digital divide, but we also within our network have a lot of other civic civil society partners who work in rural communities. So ensuring that they get our information and can spread it on, especially in spaces where people don't have access to the internet and can share it in verbal ways, whether that be through voice notes or using radio, that's incredibly important. So over the last couple of months, since the middle of March, we've actually put out about 150 individual COVID-specific bulletins across 6 countries in 11 different languages, because language also matters. Putting out a series of English bulletins doesn't really benefit everyone, and so we are focusing on using local languages so that heightens the accessibility as well.
So you spoke about working with other partners. How do you work with international organizations? What can international actors do to help your work? Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, do you work with the World Bank, with OECD, with USAID? I mean, what can the international community do to support your work?
Great, and I'd be happy for Narayan and Suba to jump in here as well with their specific context. But we've definitely, for the COVID-specific work, received funding from international partners such as the UNDP, such as different embassies around the world, who understand that trust component and having this information come from an organization that has established relationships and are trusted by young people, marginalized communities, people in rural communities, is really important. And so others have seen the value of our work and have supported us in making it available more broadly. Definitely from a funding perspective, but then also in terms of others sharing our work on social media or their larger platforms has been of benefit to us as well, because it means that it increases our reach. It also adds an additional layer of trust when people inherently trust certain names that they see attached to information. So we've definitely used these international organizations in various ways, and would love to support that, expand that layer of support as well.
But if there was one thing that international actors could do, like what would be one thing that they could do in your country that would help, provide transparency, accountability, improve that social, trust, that rebuild that social contract between citizens and the state? What would be one thing that you think would be really instrumental?
I think there are a number of things.
Not just one.
Okay, I'm going to stick to one. I put that caveat there so that you understand that
I know there's a million things everywhere, but if you have to just one.
This is my personal opinion. The one is that I think that international actors need to really be more thoughtful about getting citizens' feedback and input into their processes. I think right now a lot of aid money is being sent to countries amidst COVID mitigation strategies, and a lot is going on, and there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of room for corruption. But are we actually also engaging ordinary citizens as partners in how that happens? Are we asking them what program design should look like? Are we creating mechanisms for them to give feedback when that isn't happening? Because I think people on the ground are international organizations, key stakeholders in ensuring accountability and ensuring that they get what they actually need.
Okay. Suba, do you want to add anything on that?
Well, first of all, Sherry, that's a really, really good point. Like including the feedback of the population. Yeah, definitely. That's I would say that it's really important for the international organization to always also partner with the governments, because whenever we talk about what we can do to make the situation better, I mean, the government has to be included in that process. So that for me, that's a really important point.
And I don't know, Narayan, if you want to comment. What
Sure,
would
I
be
think
one thing that international actors could do to help out with
sure,
the?
I think support to the communities and the people working in the communities, and leave your traditional approach of funding, the donors and recipient relationship, and start a nimble, flexible, and co-creative approach.
I know you mentioned, of course, key is to work with governments, and you're a happy organization. You want to be optimistic and provide good examples and opportunities to work with governments. But how do you see, the current scenarios of a lot of governments have put place, lockdown measures, and do you see a danger of governments, given COVID, abusing, their powers, and also, not only for citizens and to, increase corruption, and as well, to shut, freedom of press? So how do you? I know it's a lot, but in the interest of making us safe, there might be also, some perverse incentives to, abuse that power. So how do you see that playing out in your countries? And yeah.
No, as I mentioned already, this is a golden opportunity for government to misuse of power. In the case of Nepal, so in the last 3 months, when the COVID hit, began seriously, the government tried various efforts to suppress the voice of the citizen, including letting the army to purchase things from China, and the ultimate idea is to bypass the constitutional bodies like anti-corruption agencies, because this anti-corruption agency have no jurisdictions or have no constitutional role to oversee the Nepal army, so that any corruption that happens, within the corruption within the Nepal army, so there won't be uh, you know so there won't be even discussion. So that's one. And then the various ordinance have tried to pass, including splitting parties, scrapping constitutional bodies, like, without the participation of the opposition leaders, the government can recruit any constitutional members in their favor. However, with the immense pressure, even during the lockdown, the government has returned without this kind of ordinance. Um, so freedom of expression is always a big challenge, though the government hasn't taken any measures legally yet, but we can see in actions, not really supporting the frontline, the frontliners, not giving, not really like supporting whistleblowers. We don't even have a whistleblowers protection policies. So this is obviously a very, very risky situation. So obviously the government always try to sustain their power, and for that, this is a golden opportunity.
I think just in terms of connecting, getting accurate information out there to abuses of power under lockdowns. So for example, in South Africa, there was a pretty stringent lockdown enforced in order to mitigate the spread of COVID by the government. And very early on, there were reports coming out of communities who were definitely brutalized by the police or the military, and that also erodes trust in a way. And many community members just didn't have access to, what do I do if I witness something? How do I, blow the whistle on this? How do I seek support? And so that also became a key function of our bulletins, making sure that people understand that this is the lockdown strategy, but these are your rights, and those rights are not suddenly negated by a lockdown strategy. So what are you still entitled to, and what protections still belong to you? And when those are breached, here are a number of ways in which you can seek support, connecting them to free legal support, and other organizations that can shine a light on this, where community members maybe don't have the knowledge or the bandwidth to do that themselves.
So communication, like you mentioned, many times is key in this, during this pandemic. Dusuba, would you like to add anything from,
Yes.
the Mali perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Extra usage of power. Let's say that when the curfew has been put in place in Mali, for the first week, things went fine. But a few weeks after, every night, and not only in Bamako, but in other cities such as Kai, Sikasso, Kati, people during the night were actually in the streets, burning things, breaking things, because obviously the curfew was not effective for them. But I just want to come back to the sentence that Narayan said at the beginning, when he said, well, who cares about the COVID-19 when you cannot work and you cannot feed your family? So this is really something that has been taking place here in Mali, and that was really difficult. And it's because of those demonstrations and those violent protests, that was because of the curfew, but also people were protesting for the result of the parliamentary election. But this is the reason why the government actually decided to lift the curfew on May the 8th. So, but there is also something, and you mentioned that the lack of communication. And this is definitely linked to the lack of trust also. If there is a lack of communication from the government to the population, where we don't know what is happening, there are some measures that are being imposed. For example, the curfew, there's a lot of people that disagree with that, simply because, yeah, it's a protection. It's the goal is to protect the population. But there's other way to protect the population, by raising awareness on the action that you have to take place to actually protect yourself and protect your family, by washing your hands and wearing a mask, for example. And this hasn't been done that much, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. Just one last question for you. I know you work in extremely difficult contexts, and you've expanded to 9 countries. What are some lessons that you've learned that could be applicable to other country contexts and other regions that you think are replicable from your work? I know you're always, you want to share positive examples. So can you share some of these the positive examples that you've encountered throughout these years that could also be replicated in other regions?
Yeah, if I may jump in. I think that first of all, the follow the money that we have in those bulletins are really key, because we are providing the right information to the local population in order for them to hold the government accountable in case of corruption cases. So this is really important. Here in Mali, also what we did, the inclusion aspect of the COVID-19 is really important. There's a lot of people that are left behind. And so we decided to start a digital campaign to put the spotlight on specific groups, such as people living with disability, people living with albinism, to make sure that they are not forgotten in the discussion, and so that the government also think about them, because they probably need more resources to fight the virus. And again, putting the emphasis on the social contract. I think, like Narayan said also, the COVID-19 crisis is actually giving us an opportunity to rethink the social contract and make sure that the government puts the well-being of the population at the center of every decision. And those are really important.
If I may add, I think one of the biggest lesson that we have learned, during earthquake and also during this pandemic, and I think this is also applies to any difficult situation, is that people in one hand need a very quick, smart, and useful information, whereas the government also very smart not to give useful and quick information. So there is a conflict of interest from the both sides. So that's why we need to create a community. We need to create a common platform and the tools to ensure that I think for me is the information. So and for that there needed a lot of investment on ideas and resources and networks to ensure that no one gets die hungry, and before that they get information they need. I also mentioned before, I think what we have learned is, the more than anything, is that the business as usual has fundamentally halted. Therefore, we need a new approaches, relationship, and tools. Again, I emphasizes that from last almost 8 and 9 years, what we learned from our campaign Integrity Icon, keep raising that positive and the great, the good values. It may seems have a little impact at the beginning, but it has a sustained and the power to change the narratives fundamentally. And the narratives is that it's not just about fighting corruption, it's really about building integrity. And it's not really going against with anyone or anything, but it's being with, and then creating that space and sort of for open dialogue, for collaboration. And finally, this is a time to invest to our young generation. A lot of young generation are stranded, in the middle of nowhere, though they have ideas, they have energy. So who is investing on these young people? So that's why Accountability Lab, even if in a very small effort, so we are trying to create a space so that their ideas are incubated, socially validated, and let that ideas become a driver for social change, also for the economic change. So this is what some of our learning. The innovation on accountability is needed, because we cannot just keep bargaining on all these great values and the theories of accountability, accountability and transparency, but are we investing on getting innovation on it that help to change human behavior, make everyone life easier through information, and get justice, so that people first find the environment to live life with happy, and then be ready to fight for any uncertainty or any injustice.
Thank you, Narayan. And Sherry, finally, the final words.
Yeah, so I think my colleagues really articulated very well the lessons that I think we can share with others. And for me, this is all underpinned by collaboration and convening, and not competing with others. Because I think the challenges of integrity and accountability in the countries where we work are so massive and so entrenched that we can only do it with a variety of stakeholders and with people coming at challenges from different angles. And so wherever we work, we try to build really meaningful partnerships that draw in new voices. I often think that it's easy to have quite highbrow conversations around what governance should look like in different spaces. But if we want norms to change, if we want people to change their behaviors so that corruption is not what we expect on a daily basis, we really need to get ordinary people on the street, and especially young people, to have access to these types of conversations, to shape shape what they think their society should look like. And through our creative campaigns, going out and asking people something as simple as, do you know an honest civil servant in your community? That gets people thinking about, what should the civil service look like? And that makes them an active stakeholder.
Yeah, what can I do? No?
Exactly.
And what can I do to change? Yeah.
Right. And so within the context of COVID, this is a pandemic that relies really on each and every one of us to play our role, to keep ourselves safe and to keep others safe. And so that, I think, by working with others, inviting new voices in, we also shift a lot of the responsibility and give people an understanding of like their individual responsibility in what their society and what governance in their space looks like. So I think that those unlikely networks are really the key.
I want to thank the three of you for for this excellent discussion and for the hard work you're doing, because these integrity, good governance issues, they're not the sexy stuff in development. They are the hard things that we need to really invest in. And as you mentioned, Sherry, it's about all of us citizens doing our part. So I want to congratulate you on the hard work and, on these very hard contexts, and that not only the countries that you're working on, but, just the general context that we're living in. And I also want to thank, our CSIS team, Yanina, Clifton, for helping us put this together, and for the audience for hearing our discussion. I addressed some of the questions that were sent from the public. So I want to thank everybody, and please keep watching our CSIS events. There are more to come in the future. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.